He threw the coins, all 30 of them. He threw them across the stone floor of the temple treasury, and they scattered and rang against the ancient stone in the silence of the morning. The priest stood watching. Judas looked at them and said what he had come to say, "I have sinned. I have betrayed innocent blood." The priests looked back at him with cold indifference and said what powerful men have always said to people who become inconvenient after they have served their purpose. "What is that to us? That is your problem." And Judas turned and walked out of the temple. He went to a field, and he did not come back. Before we get to the end of this story, we need to go back to the beginning. Because the story of Judas Iscariot is not simply the story of a greedy man who sold Jesus for money. It is the most complex, the most debated, and in many ways the most uncomfortably human story in the entire New Testament. It is a story about proximity to something sacred that does not automatically produce transformation. It is a story about the difference between remorse and repentance. And it is a story that raises a question that 2,000 years of Christian theology has never fully resolved, one we will confront directly before this video ends. Judas was chosen. That is the part people forget. He was not a random villain who inserted himself into the story of Jesus. Jesus looked at him, knew him, and called him. He was one of the 12. He traveled with the disciples across Galilee and Judea for approximately 3 years. He heard the Sermon on the Mount. He watched the healing of the blind man. He was there at the feeding of the 5,000. He saw the raising of Lazarus. He sat at the table during the Last Supper, and he was trusted. John's Gospel tells us that Judas was the keeper of the money bag, the group's treasurer. When the disciples needed funds, they went to Judas. That is not a role you give to someone you do not trust. It represents confidence, responsibility, and access. So what happened? The Gospel of John gives us our first window into Judas's character in a scene that occurs just days before the betrayal. A woman most theologians believe this was Mary of Bethany poured an entire jar of expensive perfume on Jesus's feet, pure nard. The jar was worth approximately 300 denarii, nearly a year's wages for an ordinary worker. She wiped his feet with her hair. And Judas's immediate reaction, according to John chapter 12, verse 5, was to say, why was this perfume not sold and the money given to the poor? On the surface, that sounds like concern for the poor. But John adds a detail that reframes the entire scene. He says Judas did not say this because he cared about the poor. He said it because he was a thief. He had been taking money from the group's funds for himself. The man entrusted with the finances of the disciples had been stealing from them. Jesus rebuked him in front of everyone. "Leave her alone. She has saved this for the day of my burial." Shortly after, according to Matthew chapter 26, Judas went directly to the chief priests. He asked them what they were willing to give him to hand Jesus over. They counted out 30 pieces of silver. Judas agreed. And from that moment, the Gospel of Matthew says, he was looking for a good opportunity to betray him. But here is the part of this story that is not a caricature of villainy, the Last Supper. Jesus knew. He knew everything that was about to happen, and he still chose to share that last meal with Judas present. He still washed Judas's feet along with the others. When he said that one of them at the table would betray him, the disciples began looking at each other in confusion, asking who it could be. Nobody pointed at Judas. Nobody suspected him. He had concealed this so completely that even the men who had lived with him for 3 years had no idea. Jesus gave Judas one final moment. He took a piece of bread, dipped it, and handed it directly to Judas. In the culture of first century Israel, offering someone a dipped piece of bread was an act of honor and intimacy. It was the host giving special recognition to a guest. In the middle of the most significant meal in human history, Jesus looked at the man who was going to betray him and gave him the bread of honor. And then Jesus said, "What you are going to do quickly." Nobody at the table understood what he meant. But Judas got up and went out into the night. What happened in Gethsemane is the most recognized image of the entire betrayal. Judas arrived leading a group of soldiers and officials. He had given them a signal, "The man I kiss is the one you want." He walked up to Jesus in the dark garden surrounded by armed men and said, "Greetings, Rabbi," and he kissed him. Jesus looked at him and said, "Friend, do what you came for." Friend, that word is devastating. Not traitor, not enemy. Friend. Peter grabbed a sword and cut off the ear of the high priest's servant. Jesus healed the man who had come to arrest him and then allowed himself to be taken. The disciples fled into the darkness, and Judas, having accomplished what he had come to do, disappeared into the night with the soldiers. What happened next is recorded in Matthew chapter 27. When Judas saw that Jesus had been condemned when the verdict came back, and he understood that what he had set in motion was going to end in death, the text says he was seized with remorse. not guilt that prompted him to seek restoration, not sorrow that drove him to prayer or to the disciples or to Jesus himself. The Greek word used is metamelomai, a regret, a feeling of distress over what has been done, which is distinct from the Greek word metanoia, which means genuine repentance and turning toward God. That distinction matters enormously, because Peter also betrayed Jesus that night. 3 times before the rooster crowed, Peter denied even knowing him, and Peter also wept. Peter also felt the full weight of what he had done. The difference between Peter and Judas is not in how badly they failed, it is in where they took that failure. Peter ran back to the disciples. Peter was on the shore when Jesus appeared after the resurrection. Peter received his restoration directly from the mouth of Jesus' 3 questions of love, 1 for each denial. Judas went to the priests, and when they turned him away with cold indifference, he had nowhere left to go. He had cut every connection. He had burned every bridge. He was holding 30 silver coins that felt in his hands like everything he had destroyed, so he threw them across the temple floor and left. Matthew chapter 27 verse 5 says he went and hanged himself. Acts chapter 1 verse 18 adds an additional detail that he fell headward, his body burst open, and all his intestines spilled out. Theologians and scholars have reconciled these accounts for centuries, the most common explanation being that the body fell after death, either from a broken rope or from the branch giving way, and the impact caused what Acts describes. The field where he died was called Akeldama, the field of blood. The priests took the 30 silver coins Judas had thrown back at them and used them to buy that field as a burial ground for foreigners, because they said the coins were blood money and could not be returned to the temple treasury. This fulfilled a prophecy written 600 years earlier in the book of Zechariah, 30 pieces of silver, thrown to the potter in the house of the Lord. And now the question that has no clean answer. Was Judas predestined to betray Jesus? Jesus himself had said the Son of Man will go just as it is written about him. But woe to that man who betrays the Son of Man. It would be better for him if he had not been born. That tension between the sovereignty of God's plan and the personal accountability of Judas is one of the most examined questions in Christian theology. How can Judas be held responsible for something that was necessary for the redemption of humanity? The answer most serious scholars arrive at is this: God's foreknowledge of what Judas would do is not the same thing as God causing Judas to do it. Judas was not a robot executing a predetermined program. He was a man who made real choices to steal, to go to the priests, to agree to a price, to walk into a garden with soldiers. The sovereignty of God did not eliminate his agency. It worked through it. And the second question, the one that many believers find the most difficult to sit with: could Judas have been forgiven? The answer the New Testament gives, based on everything Jesus taught about forgiveness, is yes. What Judas did was not beyond the reach of the same mercy that restored Peter, that forgave Paul, who had overseen the death of Christians, that forgave the thief dying on the cross beside Jesus with nothing but a last-moment plea. The cross was large enough for Judas, but Judas did not go to the cross. He went to the field, and that is perhaps the most sobering lesson embedded in his story. The thing that separated Judas from Peter was not the magnitude of the sin. It was the direction of the despair. Peter ran back toward Jesus. Judas ran away. Peter believed that what he had done was forgivable even before he knew for certain that it was. Judas concluded that it wasn't, and that conclusion, not the betrayal itself, sealed the end of his story. There is something in that worth sitting with long after this video ends. Because most people who have walked away from faith, who have done something they cannot forgive themselves for, who have convinced themselves that what they did puts them permanently outside the reach of mercy, are not in the position of Judas before the kiss. They are in the position of Judas after the kiss, holding the coins, feeling the weight, standing at the door of the temple. The question is not whether the forgiveness exists. It always existed. The question Jesus asked Peter 3 times on a beach at sunrise is the same question that was available to Judas that morning in the temple, and is available to every person watching this right now. Do you love me? That is all it takes to begin.